We're all set for our next session, in which we delve into the cutting-edge world of technology, startups, and the revolutionary concept of the network nation. We're thrilled to have with us Balaji Srinivasan, General Partner, Balaji Fund, Angel Investor, Tech Maven, and best-selling author. Today, he will be sharing his perspectives on disruptive dynamics, unraveling tech, startups, and the network nation, offering us a glimpse into the future of technology and how startups are redefining the way we think about society and the economy. Moderating this wonderful conversation is Sruthijith KK, VC, Bloom Ventures, who will guide us through what's sure to be a fascinating discussion. Please join me in welcoming on stage S. Balaji and Sruthijith in conversation with each other. Round of applause, please.
Ooh, it's exciting.
Does that work?
Yeah, it works.
All right. Okay, let's get started.
Yeah. So Balaji Srinivasan, the most interesting man in the world, at least to me. Exciting to do this. So Balaji, for 15 minutes or so, and over the next 15 minutes, we're going to cover a bunch of topics. We're going to cover, hopefully, all interesting, some provocative, and a little bit controversial, right? Yeah. And the topics range from how do you invent a new country, and what's the next country that's going to get invented? How do you live to 120? Then we're going to discuss India. We're going to discuss a little bit about India AI and India Bitcoin. We're going to keep it exciting. And Balaji, I know you speak fast. You're going to really fast. And so much I want to ask you. Let's get going. So we start with Network State. That's the new book you've written. And it's published online. And in that, Balaji talks about how a small group of very highly aligned individuals can come together using digital tools, a common charter, and cryptocurrency to create virtual communities, and then, very interestingly, crowdfund them, sort of populate these physical nodes, and eventually canvas for recognition as a diplomatic entity. Very provocative. The book is out. It's public. It's called The Network State. Balaji also has something called the Network School, which he'll talk about.
Should I just chip in?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the fundamental concept is we've started new companies, we've started new currencies. Can we start new cities or even new countries? And the most important kind of innovation in the world is political innovation. In a sense, for example, India's liberalization in 1991 was its second declaration of independence. Perhaps the Pokhran nuclear test was the third, right? And so being able to actually get independent and actually be able to innovate at the political level enables everything above that. The trillion-dollar economy comes from the ability to change the laws at the root level. And we're experiencing this now, for example, in the US and in the West, where there's a conflict between what I call the network and the state, between technology, between the billion-person communications networks and cryptocurrency networks and the government, the US government. Which is trying to tax or regulate the tech billionaires out of existence, as the tech billionaires are doing free speech and free markets online and on chain. And the conflict between these two can be resolved in many different ways. But one way it can be resolved is if the tech founders figure out ways to actually merge the network with the state, as is what is happening, for example, in El Salvador or in Argentina, where there are states that have actually managed to cultivate tech founders and bring them in from around the world. I think Prime Minister Modi has been very good about this in terms of reaching out to the Indian diaspora and the Indian network around the world, all the Indian tech CEOs. That's another version of this. But the most interesting version to me, or the newest, is the concept of actually being able to found not just a company, but a country or a city. And you do this by taking your large online community, you start gathering them in one place, and you gather them in many places. And the sum of that population, income, and real estate footprint could be larger than that of a legacy nation state. It's like a social network, but it owns territory. And so that's a concept.
Yeah. Yep. So Balaji, before you go to network school, so do you think it's possible that, say, a bunch of like well-meaning Indians collect together And they figured out a country where you can kind of, say Bulgaria, it's depopulating, right? 7 million people depopulating, doesn't have great weather. And is it possible to kind of buy into, is that the vision, so to say?
So all right, answer partly. Right now, I think, and maybe there's people in the room who think this is obvious, maybe there's people who disagree with me. I do believe the world is on the verge of, if not in the middle of, a sovereign debt crisis. And, for example, it's going on in Japan and the UK and Canada. Many of these economies are either melting down, on the verge of melting down, and that'll eventually come back to the US. And that's because there's two ways of exiting that, either a huge print of money, which is a more likely scenario, or rates remain high and a bunch of banks and commercial real estate firms and so on start dying. And at the end stage of that, I think there will be a lot of land for sale. You're already seeing this in the US, where many properties in big cities are going for cents on the dollar in San Francisco and other places. And in the event that something like that happens, similar to the 2008 crash, but tougher, there will be a lot of land for sale. And then on top of that, there's a depopulation thing that you mentioned. I think Japan in particular has Akiya and Inada, which are types of homes that are in the middle of rural Japan that are just unpopulated because their population has crashed. And so there's large, and then you combine that with Starlink, you combine that with remote work, you combine that with cryptocurrency. If you are mobile, you can group with your people in the cloud and then move to new spots on the land and essentially reopen the frontier of the 1800s, but rather than in one place offline, it's online and all around the world.
Yeah, interesting. So we're going to keep moving, and we're going to move to India, which is something you've written about. You wrote this fantastic tweet called "Investing in India is Improving India," which the Prime Minister himself co-tweeted, etc. So now India's a leapfrog nation, which is like a term I use, and you've also spoken about India as a civilizational entity, an ancient civilization, and also the startup nation, right? 1991 is when we kind of became that. So it's a young startup nation. And sort of this term that we use, Bloom publishes a report called the Indus Valley Report, where you kind of bring these two together, the Indus Valley civilization and Indus Valley as in Silicon Valley. So my question to you is, you've been such a bull, such an optimist on India, right? And what, according to you, are the next 1, 2, 3 steps that India needs to take to sort of hit product market fit as a startup nation?
Sure. So I am moderately optimistic on India and extremely optimistic on Indians. And what I mean by that is I think the Indian state has done a good job over the last several years, but it's difficult to manage 1 billion plus people and so on. But if you combine that with the Indian diaspora and the Indian network, that's actually a very formidable thing. So I'm extremely bullish on the Indian network, of which the Indian state is a subset. And what's the Indian network? Well, that's, for example, all of the technological, but also political, finance, media figures that have arisen now in the West, but globally. And with the advent of Reliance Jio, 1 billion Indians are now actually full internet citizens. They can actually sign smart contracts, they can communicate, they can transact with anybody else online. And that's actually the total opposite of what happened with China, right? India and China actually, if China has a totally closed off network, a Galapagos Islands, an ecosystem all to their own, India's network, its key characteristic is it's integrated with the rest of the English-speaking world and really the rest of the world. And so the emergence of that will be completely different. And so I'm very bullish on anything that is internet first within India, where it's just essentially developed with the idea that you're an internet Indian and you're global and you have an international perspective.
Yeah, so Balaji, one question. So we've got the Indians sort of doing really well, right? And but why aren't the Indian companies, like for example, China has got the opposite. They've got the Sheins, the TikToks, the Alibabas. But where's the big Indian Decacon or like Centicon, which is kind of well known out there? Australia's got Canva, for instance. What's holding us back? It's not lack of capital.
I mean, the flip answer is you've got Google and Microsoft. But the deeper answer is that, and you can make excuses and so on. So I'll give the excuse version, then I'll give some other versions, right? The excuse version is 1978, Deng Xiaoping did reform and opening up in China, and it took 13 more years for India to go capitalist. And so there's roughly a 10-year lag on lots of things. India is, China with a 10-year lag, right? But so that's one argument. A second argument is, if we think about India and China and the U.S., China arguably plays the world's best home game in the sense of they've just got this massive physical build out and all this stuff. but their diaspora is kind of being pushed back overseas. In any country where China doesn't have hard power, its diaspora is often finding it harder and harder to get visas, right? Whereas India plays arguably the world's best away game. So the Indian diaspora does phenomenally well around the world. We can learn accents, we can learn languages, we can learn politics, we can operate financially, we can have 1 foot at home and 1 foot away. With the OCI card, you're an overseas citizen of India and you're a complement to the citizen of India, right? And India's, so that's a different kind of strategy, and it suggests that just like you don't want to naively copy the US, you don't necessarily want to naively copy China, India's emergence mode will be different. And I think the types of things that Indians and India will be good at will be those things that are based on this global network. So, for example, Polygon is maybe the first Indian breakout because it's not really Indian, it's on-chain, right? It's not a, go ahead.
Polygon is a very large crypto company.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not just a crypto, it is a crypto company.
Yeah.
You also think of it as a crypto protocol, so it's multiple billions. Maybe the single largest Indian global breakout in the sense of something that somebody in France or Argentina or Mexico would use without thinking of it as Indian would be something like that, right?
I get you. All right, let's get a little bit to, because given the audience area, AI and India. There was this recent article in Bloomberg which talked about how Philippines, there's like shivers going down all the KPOs and the ITS companies because of AI. How big is this likely to be? How fast is this animal moving? And how should all the CEOs of ITS companies, the Wipros and the Infosys be worried?
No, I think, so AI is, so one way to think about it is amplified intelligence, also Indians, okay,
Yeah.
right? So AI is very, very good for India, extremely good for India, and here's why. There's both the digital white collar and digital blue collar aspect of things. So digital blue collar, with these, on the order of 1 billion Android phones that are being distributed, there is a pressing hunger for training data, right? That is to say, for example, if you look at AI image generators, the hands are often off, right? Why is that? Because we're very sensitive to how hands look and different postures of hands. There isn't the training data. So you can imagine someone with their phone and they're being told, take a photo of your hand like this, like this, like this, like this, right? And there's so much that can be collected in terms of training data that we've actually hit the limits of what the open internet would give us, okay? So essentially just for those who don't know, the last 10, 20, 30 years of message boards and social media, all that data was used to train AI. But that data was not built to train AI. That's to say, it was just random comments, it was random posts on social media. It wasn't meant to train the algorithm, right? If you generate data that is meant to train the algorithm, it looks quite different. And so digital blue collar work will be data that is meant to train AI. For example, walking around with a phone might allow the AI to learn how motion works or things of that nature, okay? So digital blue collar will be a big thing, and all of these phones, one thing I do think about is anywhere there's a phone, there's a job. You can earn cryptocurrency for training AI, okay? So that's something you could do with a huge swath of Indians potentially. On the other end of the spectrum, the complete meltdown of American media means that AI has opened up essentially a once-in-a-century opportunity. Do you know how Hollywood was actually started?
No.
Okay, so there's a great book called, by Neil Gabler called An Empire of Their Own. And essentially Edison had all the patents in New Jersey for motion picture production. And so a group of immigrants went all the way out to Los Angeles, and it was good for scenery in terms of, deserts and mountains and beaches and stuff. But it was also good for patents because Edison, it was
so
a painful,
far away from New Jersey.
It was so far away, exactly. Yeah. So they built this nascent motion picture industry, and they fought Edison on lawsuits and stuff, and that's how Hollywood was born, okay? Now, India can do something similar. Why? We already have generic drugs, right? Essentially for years, India, whether you call it ignoring patents, whether you call it essentially not recognizing how much of their legitimacy, it's because of that India has the generic drug and biotech industry that it does. And that's why India was able to have its own vaccine during COVID and has its own burgeoning pharma and biotech industry. So India has an opportunity to do the same with AI, call it generic AI, where it simply doesn't recognize copyright and all this copyright infringement that the rest of the world will be doing, rather than having, I don't know the exact number, it's like 80 or 90 year copyright that Disney and others lobby for. India says, actually, no, we're gonna give you 5-year copyright and that's it. And everybody from around the world, come and train your models in India, okay? Why? Because that'll give a huge boost. India is a big and strong enough country that it can make the financial case, it can also make the moral case. You'll get lots and lots of developers, lots of engineers that will rally to come here and do that. and you just basically budget for the political battle and, the World Trade Organization, or whatever court it is, there'll be a zillion patent fights back and forth. It'll be just like early Hollywood, right? Yeah. Because what'll happen is you'll make the money from essentially truly open AI, open source AI, and you'll have the industry here. You'll be able to fight the suits, and eventually you'll win.
Very interesting. Patent temporal asymmetry, or whatever you want to call it, like leverage.
Yeah. And so this gets back to my earlier point of legal innovation.
Yeah.
Is actually the cheapest innovation. A lot of people, governments, for example, they think they need to do subsidies to bring in tech guys and so on and so forth. Actually, the greatest subsidy is the one that doesn't cost anything at all, which you take some old antiquated regulation, you put a line through it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, drones or 3D printing, just allow that to happen. In this case, you just disallow old copyright. You allow people to train on Disney movies. You essentially say public domain is much earlier than people think. That would change everything.
Yeah. All right, Balaji. On India, last question. So got you here. Are there anything that's disappointed you about India? Like, candidly, like the Bitcoin ban, for instance. I know you kind of wrote about it.
They didn't ban it. They did. So I do think, so on cryptocurrency, right? Yeah. So everybody here probably has WhatsApp. And in WhatsApp, you have a group chat. And in the group chat, you have domestic Indian numbers, and you also have international numbers. And you're able to transparently, easily, without thinking about whether somebody is, in the US or in India, or has a US number, has an Indian number, you can just talk back and forth and it's fine and it's easy, right? In the same way, like, the rupee is fine for domestic transactions, but what currency will Indians use abroad? It's going to end up being, in the fullness of time, cryptocurrency. Because cryptocurrency is a neutral rail. It's good for international transactions. A smart contract can be signed by a Brazilian, a Japanese, an Indian, an American, and you have a neutral court that arbitrates it. And U.S. Judges or Chinese, courts can't freeze those funds. So abroad, India and Indians are stronger with cryptocurrency. And at home, for sure, use a rupee, it's fine, right? But just like you have domestic and international communications in WhatsApp, you have domestic and international transactions with the rupee and cryptocurrency, and they're complementary to each other. So the only thing I'm a little disappointed in is people framing cryptocurrency as it's anti-sovereignty or something like that. It actually enhances India's sovereignty because it's not being the number one or the number two globally. It can be the number three. It can pursue open source. So rather than have the dollar versus the renminbi, India can have the rupee domestically, and it can have cryptocurrency globally, and it can be stronger, it can be accepted everywhere, and it can be not blocked anywhere.
Intriguing. I haven't heard that answer. Yeah. Great. So last question, and to give you the complete range of Balaji's interests, etc. Transhumanism, eternal life. Balaji's spoken about that. There's a lot of research going on. The Overton window on that has shifted. David Sinclair, all of that. So just to kind of get your perspective, and we'll try and keep it a little like life advice from you,
Sure.
What is, how far are we away from living to 120? Okay, and what are the steps that folks here need to take? I'm sure everyone here wants to live forever, but yeah.
Yeah, so transhumanism, another word for talking about it is like human self-improvement. And essentially, like my friend Brian Johnson and I, we're doing something new, ns.com, and it's a network school camp in, it's really a campus that we've opened up near Singapore. It's really focused on this. And one way of thinking about it is, we have all these dashboards for what's going on in Bangalore or Budapest, but not for one's own body, right? You don't actually have the metrics there. And, so now with Fitbit and with Apple Watch and so on, you have those metrics. Okay, and so how can you synthesize them? How can you develop actions on them? How can you get notifications on yourself? Again, starting to get this stuff with Apple Watch. And then the next step is, with the genetics and with biotech, we can actually modify. I mean, one way of thinking about it is, India recently at the Olympics, didn't do that great with a billion plus people, a bronze medal or, so no golds. And if you think about the biochemistry of that, one of the things that we did recently, we funded something called the Enhanced Games. And the Enhanced Games, so me, Peter Thiel, a few others, actually an Indian origin founder, said, okay, what if you actually have a totally new sport?
Yeah. I'm getting
okay.
Wrap it.
So check that out. That's actually something where it's all about transhumanism and human self-improvement. All right?
Great, Balaji. Riveting. This has been interesting. Had the time of my life here. Great. Thank you.
All right, cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Balaji and Sruthijith, for sharing your incredible insights and experiences on disruptive dynamics. Your work continues to push the boundaries of technology and investment. This is a wonderful photo op. In this photo op, people will be wondering why I'm here. But that's that. Thank you both so much. Thank you, gentlemen. Now for our next segment, we shall have an in-depth discussion on navigating the new normal, doing business in a world with rising uncertainty. And we're joined by a wonderful stellar panel. Rich Lesser, Global Chair, BCG. Marc-André Blanchard, Head CDPQ International. Ritu Arora, CEO and CIO Asia Pacific at Allianz Investment Management. Nouriel Roubini, Professor Emeritus, Stern School of Business, New York University, and CEO, Roubini Macro Associates. And steering this discussion is our moderator, Sruthijith KK, Executive Editor at The Economic Times. It's going to be a wonderful chat. Thank you all so much for being here. Please give them a huge round of applause. Come on, room. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for being here. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. What an exhilarating day of conversations we have had today. And as we wait for the Prime Minister to arrive and address the gathering, we now get to listen to 4 elite thinkers from around the world from diverse pursuits. I will open it up by turning to each one of you for opening remarks. What I'm really interested in hearing from all of you is, what is the one data point or trend or phenomena underway right now in your world that's a source of optimism and one that's a source of concern? And I'm defining, for the purposes of this discussion, your world as, for Marc, sustainability, ESG and environment; for Professor Roubini, global macroeconomics; for Ritu, global markets; and for Rich, AI and all emerging technologies. We'll start from you, Marc.
Thank you very much. Well, rapidly, because so what excites me in sustainability at the moment is, well, we're finally past we've discussed the goals, we've discussed the disclosure in investments, we've discussed all of these things, and now we're into actions. We're actually, last year we had, just in renewables, the capacity of production in renewables has risen by 50% just last year versus 2022. So we're now positively engaging, even in my fund, we're actually looking about, okay, yes, we need to reduce our carbon footprint, but we actually focus on getting more and more green assets and low carbon assets, and how can we participate in the transition? And that's key. What scares me is actually, if there's no transition in the global south, there will be no transition. If there's no transition in the north, there will be no transition. Well, last year, and for that to happen, for the transition to happen in the global south, you need hundreds of billions to go into the global south in terms of new infrastructure and the like, to actually adapt and mitigate. Last year, there was a negative. There was an outflow of capital from the emerging markets by 69 billion. So we're going in the wrong direction. And we did not succeed in doing this when the inflation was low, when the interest rates were low, and when the geopolitics was a bit calmer. And now we need to do it in a very different context. And last year was the proof that it's so difficult. So that scares me, because there's a question of trust between the North and the South, and the geopolitics of it that comes with it. So that's the more negative part.
Anything that's a source of optimism and joy?
The first part, that actually we now are discussing, when you go to COP last year in the UAE, the discussion was not so much about the goals and everything. It was about the how. And for the first time, the private sector was there in a big way. And the private sector, we look at it as an investment opportunity. And I think that is a game changer, and that will accelerate the transition, and it's going to be good for all of us all around the world, and for investors like us. Just to give you the example, I mean, we were the first out of the gate in actually calculating our carbon footprint. We're now really out of the gate because it's important for us to how we invest and what we invest in, but also what do we do with our portfolio companies. And actually, we're now engaging with our portfolio companies to make sure that not only that they transition, they become best in class, because we think it's value creation, but it is actually very important for asset owners to engage. That's where we'll have the biggest impact, is helping others reduce their carbon emission.
Professor Roubini?
I would say that on the positive side, I would argue that the global economy most likely is going to achieve a soft landing. The concerns that there will be a recession following the tightening of monetary policy have been proven incorrect, in part because the negative aggregate supply shocks that occurred during COVID have been reversed. And on top of it, I would say that the AI revolution is going to lead to further positive aggregate supply shocks that increase productivity, economic growth potential, and reduce cost of production. So that's feeding in the right direction. Recently, however, I wrote a column that was titled Artificial Intelligence versus Human Stupidity, arguing that there is many problems that are actually man-made that are getting worse. We have a process of excessive deglobalization is leading to protectionism, and that's going to fragment the global economy. We have a geopolitical depression that has both political, geopolitical, and economic consequences. We are reshoring and frontshoring, but we're emphasizing economic security over economic efficiency. Aging of population may reduce growth and increase cost of production, and other restriction to migration from south to north, from poor to rich, that kept the lead on wage growth. There are a variety of other stagflationary shocks that are inflationary. We saw the resurgence of inflation in the last few years, and the combination of climate change, pandemics, geopolitical depression, restriction to movements of goods, capital, labor, and so on, cyber warfare, and a backlash against a liberal democracy is leading to populist policy are all stagflationary factors that reduce growth and increase the cost of production. So it's a tug of war between technology leading us in the right direction and lots of other things leading us to negative aggregate supply shocks. I think that over the medium term, technology is going to dominate, and therefore the future of the economy globally is going to be bright if you can address also some of the side effects of technologies. But in the short run, those stagflationary forces may be more dominant and hamper economic growth and increase actual inflation.
Thank you. I represent a world of investments and capital markets, and in our world, the glass is always half full and half empty, and there are equal number of people usually on either side, and that's what keeps the markets going. How I look at it, not to repeat the points already made, they're all very significant trends that also impact capital markets. Sustainability is an interesting way how capital markets are going to be shaped in future. I think that is something I positively look out to, because capital, institutional capital, has been seeking sustainable businesses. Now I see a trend where even private capital is seeking sustainability. And hence, for businesses to sustainably have capital flow, they will need to be sustainable. So I think that is significantly impacting the way the world will be. It's just not a fad anymore. It is what will attract and the capital flow and impact the capital flow. So for me, that is something I look out for as a positive. In terms of things that make us nervous or things that we look at with great anticipation, besides the points already mentioned and things like too long, high interest rates high for too long, etc., I think US elections will really impact capital markets in a very significant way, and we have with great anticipation looking at how US chooses their leader. And I think that will have a significant impact, not just on the US economy and capital markets, but on the global It will have an impact on the trade flows. So that's a very significant event that we are looking out for.
Over to you, Rich.
So on AI, is this on? Yes, oh, now it is, great. So on AI, well, I guess I'd like to just start by building on Professor Roubini's comments. I'm really optimistic at the opportunity that this is going to present, and we could have a long discussion around that. I'll focus on three things. One is, I think it's going to turn out to be a boon to education and to give every child and every adult around the world opportunity for customized, tailored paths to grow skills and to really achieve their fullest potential in ways we can't yet imagine as we really unlock this. Second, I'm so excited about the ability to deliver better health when you combine AI with the various diagnostic tools and other things. I think it's going to have massive impacts on improving health, particularly in parts of the world with less access to top-tier medicine or medical advice right now. And then third, the world I'm closest to, I think we're seeing in the business world really a period of enormous learning about how to actually capture value from it. Of course, there's a lot of hype when a new technology like generative AI first comes out, but as we see companies now really digging in, they're realizing three things. One, it's really about how do you pick a few areas where you can have major impact rather than peanut buttering. Because two, the people part of it is extremely challenging. Predictive AI, the AI that we've been dealing with for the last 8 years, maybe touched 5% of the workforce in an organization. These technologies can touch 50% of the organization. And so it's going to be extremely important to really get value on that. And three, there's enormous opportunity not just to deploy tools, but to really reshape entire business functions, develop new business models, and I'm excited about that. That's the optimistic side. On the challenge side, I would highlight first the need for responsible AI frameworks, both at the business and at the societal level. There's a lot of work. Brad Smith wrote a book, Tools and Weapons, where he talked about every technology can be used for good and for harm. This is a very powerful one. There's a lot of learning left to do. Second, there's a huge amount of reskilling and upskilling that's going to be required for workforces all around the world. And I think that many, many companies are struggling to figure out how they're really going to help their people take full advantage of these technologies. And I'm optimistic we'll figure it out, but I don't want to underestimate the challenge. And the potential to leave people behind is very real. And that's going to take a lot of work to help bring everyone along. And I think that'll have bumps along the way.
Thank you. I want to come to you, Professor Roubini, for the first question in the second round. On the question of, many people are of the view that asset prices are at stratospheric levels in many markets. Fed is expected to cut rates, and typically when that happens, more money will flow into these exact, or more money will chase these exact assets that are already seen to be overvalued. What, in your view, is going to happen? Will there be even more money chasing already overvalued assets?
Well, I would try to distinguish between maybe the US stock markets and other ones, because price-earning ratios are quite high in the United States, driven by big tech, but they've been somehow depressed, for example, in Europe. They were very depressed for a long time in Japan. Now they're recovering. And they've been depressed for the right reasons in China because of their own economic difficulties, while they're rising overall in India. This country is growing very, very fast. So is there frothiness in some parts of the equity market? Probably yes. Given the disruption that AI is going to provide under some scenarios, US potential growth by the end of this decade could be above 3% as opposed to the current 1.8%. You could argue that that might be justified. As long as the economy doesn't go into a recession, there is a soft landing. As long as the Fed cut rates, probably these valuations that are high are going to remain high. You can have corrections of 10% more, like it happened even in August, and then a reversal, and such correction have occurred even in the last year or so. But to get the real bear market in the US stock market, you need a recession. And for now, a recession would not be my baseline. My concern will be more broadly that there is excessive amounts of debt and leverage throughout the economy. During the GFC was households and traditional banks, now it's more corporate sector and shadow banks. Of course, governments from US, Europe, around the world are highly leveraged. And there are also forms of hidden leverage in various parts of the financial system. So if a shock were to occur when there's an economic contraction, that amount of leverage together with a P&L shock, with balance sheet stress, could lead actually to significant amount of distress. And what we've been doing in the last decade is every time there is a financial shock, we bail out the system. We did it during the GFC, we did during COVID, we did even last year when a couple of small commercial banks in the US went bust, and then we guaranteed even the uninsured deposits. And that leads to a situation of moral hazard where people believe that when things go right, you appease it, and when they go wrong, you come to backstop them. And that type of moral hazard leads to excessive leverage and risk-taking that eventually build up leverage that once a real shock occurs may lead to a significant financial distress. So that's something to keep in mind as a risk.
Ritu touched upon the US elections as a source of concentration of risk. You touched upon the same during your own remarks this morning. Could you touch upon, how should we look at it? Like what specific areas would be of most concern as risks emanating from, depending on which way the US elections go?
Well, if Trump were to be elected and if he were to follow strictly what he says he wants to do, we'd impose 10% tariffs on all imports coming from everywhere, including Fed zone allies, up to 60% on China. He may try to devalue the value of the dollar to restore US competitiveness. He may make the Fed less independent. That could be inflationary. He might want to make permanent $5 trillion of tax cuts in a situation where deficit and debt are very high. And the combination of those policies, in my view, will cause higher inflation, lower economic growth, could lead to a significant increase in bond yields and even a correction in US stock prices. If he does what he says he wants to do, the good news might be that he might choose economic advisors. They're going to make him warn it that the stock market, the bond market crash will not be the best way to start his new administration, and therefore either he does it or market discipline is going to force him to behave in a different way. But if you take at face value what he wants to do, those sets of policy look quite risky, as opposed to those that would occur if Harris were to be elected, that are more mainstream economic policies. Of course, the US has a fiscal problem, regardless of who is going to come in power, but at least Harris wants to raise taxes to pay for some of those tax cuts and create the spending, while in the case of Trump, large fiscal deficit might become even more severe. So that's another risk to keep in mind.
Ritu, let me come to you on from US to China. The buildup of debt levels in China, as indeed it happens anytime there is a buildup of that kind of stress in any part of the world, there is some potential for spillover. How do you view fund flows getting impacted as a consequence of a kind of eruption in some kind of debt levels in China or events relating to debt?
Sure. China definitely is within Asia Pacific and even globally a center for close monitoring and concern. There are various points of stress in the economy, debt overflow being one of them. The entire financial setup has been under pressure. Fortunately, it's a closed economy where the government and the regulators have a lot of levers still with a currency that is well managed. So while India should benefit, is the obvious fallout for China's stress, and I already see institutional flows into India significantly rising. The fact that we are making our way as a larger share into indices is helping. So China remains under stress. India is structurally well poised to benefit from that stress which China is witnessing. We have all the fundamentals in place, structurally strong, the economy is growing well, resilient. So I think China's loss, as is often said, could be India's gain.
And how do you view the trend of retail investors going into the Indian markets in a big way? Is that beneficial in the long run? Is it leading to some unrealistic valuations?
It is actually a very interesting trend. In past, when FII sneezed, the stock markets plummeted. last few years, the amount of retail flows that we've seen in the market, every outflow from FIIs is more than counterbalanced by domestic retail flow, which is very heartening. The fact that our market cap is 146% of GDP now shows the confidence that retail as well as institutional investors still have in Indian markets. So I'm pretty confident, and I like this trend. At the same time, this has created a bit of froth, be it in IPOs, small caps, and that is a case for worry, because if we see any kind of stabilization, the market's at 24 times forward, so it's not inexpensive. And if we see some kind of a fallout of US elections or other economic, the geopolitical stress and other economic impacts on India, we might see retail investors impacted and hurt in the bargain, because they are significantly invested in small caps.
I have many, many more questions for all four of you. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and we have to close the panel, because now we are going to the silent period, and then we, wait for the Prime Minister's address. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. A big round of applause for our panelists, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. A massive thank you to our panelists for sharing their game plans and strategies for thriving in these unpredictable times. It is clear that while the future might look like a mystery novel, we've got the best authors in the business to guide us. Oh, sir, no worries. Also, a big thank you to Sruthijith for keeping us on track like a compass in a storm. These two quotes I have written myself and spent 7 months thinking of them. So, yeah, give them all a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. And now, a quick reminder to our audience members, please do collect your headphones from the headphone booth, which is there, for the next session. Hindi to English translation is available on channel number 1 on your devices. And then please do return the headphones back to the headphone zone after the session. I had to say that. Also, a quick reminder that the security drill necessitates that some protocols have to be done before our Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi ji, enters the hall, which is why there will be a silent period which will now be initiated. We would like to request you in this period to please not move out. The doors are going to be closed and no one can stand up. So I request you all to please be seated. Also, a quick reminder that after the Prime Minister exits from the stage, we would request you not to get up from your seats, especially those who are seated near the ballroom doors. Please request you to kindly remain seated and only move until a security clearance has come in. Thank you so much for your cooperation, your patience with the protocol. And in this silent period, request you not to move out. Keep your phones on silent mode and also be seated throughout the course of the session. Here onwards, the silent period will now